all these ice melts on Greenland, the ice cap, and the Antarctic are basically tempering what is happening to the globe generally. And when this ice disappears, we will have a spike, a very high spike. And that got him to write about the vanishing face of Gaia, which was his latest book in 2009, which is actually a very frightening book when you read it, because he looks at carrying capacity of what he believes. And again, this is based on the best available science that he's putting out there in terms of his models, and it's high, you know, and it's not very encouraging. He's saying the band of livable and arable space on the planet will probably be enough to effectively support about 1 billion people. Well, in a world where you're looking at 10 billion,
yeah.
you got a serious problem. All right.
So is IPCC? So you're saying this is more drastic than IPCC?
Yes.
So have you taken his recommendations? Because it makes sense. The latent heat is just pulling more. Right?
Well, I mean, he's a kind of an avant-garde scientist, and he's avant-garde, but he has been proven right. Over. He's in his 90s now.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if it's still true, but Richard Branson actually has him listed as one of the first passengers on his space flight, his commercial space flight, if he's reasonably healthy.
What is reflected is he's more accurate in his measurements, he's more precise, and he can monitor the spikes much more with his techniques, or he believes that to do that. Whereas IPCC is probably going with general set normal.
Well, IPCC has got some political underpinnings that temper. They're afraid to say drastic things.
Consensus has to be built all the time.
There's consensus tends to neutralize or make more normalized any outcome. All right.
But he's not talking local effect. He's talking
global.
effect.
Absolutely.
Well, his thinking also is like John Paul saying, you are in a stable state of equilibrium right now, which is slightly shifting, but you can all of a sudden have a change where your whole equilibrium can shift to another level, and that level may not be favorable to the human
And
species.
if we look at measurements in ice cores, it has happened before, where you have slow change and then radical change.
No, it makes sense, right? The latent heat is being absorbed by that transition change of phase, and then at some point, change of phase is complete.
Once you're in a transition,
and the heat has to go to temperature rise at that point.
And I think the simple metaphor of an ice box makes all the sense in the world. And you know, and
it's simple enough for everybody to get it, I'm saying, all the scientists and stuff.
There's also
If you don't want to get it, you'll never get it.
Okay, let's finish and then we'll have discussions.
Yeah, and actually this has been supported by Jim Hansen, who is now retired from NASA, and he wrote a book after he left NASA because he couldn't say what he wanted to say when he was at NASA, Storms of My Grandchildren, which is another frightening book because he tends to agree with Lovelock. Now he spent his 45 some odd years with NASA basically pushing the envelope. He was the first person to testify in Congress in 1988 about climate change as a national security issue, effectively. All right. So 1988, that was what, 30 years ago.
For Rio happened after that.
What?
The Rio conference in '92.
It
happened after this thing.
So we're talking about relatively recent acknowledgement by the scientific community, and I'm saying this is a very narrow community still, all right, saying these are issues that are worth considering and what might we do about it. And it's not just so the world's going to be warmer. And now it's being framed as national security, and it is a national
human security.
Right.
Security.
Now, this is interesting. In 1989, James Burke, who was a documentary filmmaker, did a film, and you can find this film if you want to watch it. It's fascinating. It's called After the Warming, and I've got it written here. It starts with a scene in New Orleans being evacuated due to sea flooding in a hurricane.
Katrina.
Yeah. No, but this is written in the 80s.
I know.
All right.
I know.
And he says that was at the beginning of the film. He says this was the event that woke everybody up.
Yeah.
when New Orleans flooded, all right? And the coincidence is unbelievable. But as we look at some of the ice melt issues, we have, IPPC is saying ice melt, 1 meter, right? 2 meters.
Right.
Well, if you calculate the ice melt of just Greenland,
Yeah, Arctic and Greenland.
no, just Greenland, what's the sea level rise?
Two
21 feet,
21 feet.
7 meters.
Yeah.
That much?
That much. Because the IPPC is saying, well, that's landlocked ice. And we know that Greenland is self-lubricating now. They're having these spiral vortexes that are basically the water's draining underneath the ice. And the ice is starting to move. And if that ice slides off the land, it's all in the ocean. All right? So
That's where it's supposed to go.
And these theories are now they're revisiting these theories because that's exactly what's happening in Greenland. You're having ice that would have been considered not likely to basically calve off as an iceberg, sliding off, all right?
And it will slide with the water.
Of course, it's self-lubricating,
Yeah, so,
and most of the water is coming from underneath the ice. And this is moving the ice slowly off the land. And Greenland, we're not talking Arctic or Antarctic, just Greenland,
21 feet.
21 feet.
most of land is gone.
Forget
Yeah.
Manhattan.
Manhattan,
Miami.
Bangladesh, you name it, Maldives, everything. I mean, Hawaii, most of Hawaii, right? But so, and it's a very interesting movie or document. It's a pseudo documentary that talks about what you need to do on a global level, and it is so advanced thinking. It's really an interesting thing to watch. He's talking about nobody eats meat anymore because of the carbon footprint of meat.
Yes.
Just one thing after another that has been effectively banned, and he's projecting himself 50 years into the future in the movie. He's looking back at what happened and what they did to solve the problem. And it's a very different looking world. It's really an interesting film. Now, what I'm trying to basically get across here is the fact that we have moved from the science to the story. In other words, we now, in the last 10 years, we have moved from people in science talking about this, and maybe in some circles of politics talking about this, to the general population talking about this. And I think that's a watershed event, because when you now begin to take the science and make it understandable to a larger part of the world, you begin to have the underpinnings of what is called political action, or people begin to say, we need to do something. It's a collective consciousness. And one of the things that few people know perhaps is that Al Gore, who did The Inconvenient Truth, which is a book and then a film, actually wrote a book in 1993 called Earth in the Balance. And what he's talking about in that book is very similar to what he wrote in The Inconvenient Truth 15 years later. So you begin to see that if you get that message out there, then you begin to mobilize and create this what's called a collective consciousness, where people can begin to say, okay, this is going to, maybe it won't affect me, but it might affect my children. Certainly it'll affect my grandchildren. And if I'm a responsible human being, if I'm any kind of human being, I have to start thinking about this in terms of what we can do to solve the problem and what we can do to prevent the problem from getting worse as we go forward. And one of the most agitating writers about this is Bill Mckibben, and I've talked about this before, but he has written so widely and so, I think, convincingly, and he's organized a group called 350.
Yeah.
Right?
Not all, 350.
Yeah.
And so the 350 group, now, you know where you get the name 350? 350 is 350 parts per billion.
Right.
Is where we need to be
Yeah.
to stabilize the climate.
Right.
Now, where were we last
Half a
year?
million, right?
400.
Per billion.
Parts per million,
Million.
Per million, right?
ppm.
Right. Where were we last year?
400 plus.
410, 420.
Yeah.
So we've overshot. We have to go down. All right, we can't even stay the same right now. We have to go down. And you know, you saw the Paris Treaty, and you just saw the UN meeting that is talking about this. Hopefully, the talk will turn into some action, because I think really these people that know, the politicians that are talking not only to the scientists but to the people at the Pentagon, who are saying this is critical, this is going to affect the way we behave, are now beginning to say we have to abandon this. It is not an irony, or it's not a coincidence that one of the biggest coal companies in the world just went bankrupt. It went bankrupt because they're